estoy emitiendo.
Ya, vale.
Muy bien. ¿Has mandado monitores también? Pues entonces, ¿por qué estoy sonando en sala? Yo bajo el máster.
Dale. Pues ya, ¿qué monitores está abajo?
Estaba haciendo pruebas con los productores y de repente ha dejado de sonar. ¿Se han puesto nerviosos?
No lo entiendo, tío.
Tienes que estar arriba, Andrés.
¿Ahora me escuchan? ¿Ok? Ok, gracias.
I still hope you can hear me. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Dear colleagues, today's debate here in Madrid takes place in the framework of our work on updating our workers' group priorities under the overarching motto of pushing for social progress to be ready on 13th of December, well in time for the EU elections. It's really an honor to be here before you in this meeting organized jointly with the two Spanish trade union organizations, Unión General de Trabajadores, UGT, and Comisiones Obreras. I want to extend a warm welcome to all the participants in this auditorium, named after the founding member of Comisiones Obreras and its first Secretary General, Marcelino Camacho, who came from the Metal Workers Union, like me. I am also extremely happy that we are having also some of our former members here with us. It's always a pleasure to see you, and this is a unique opportunity to have a chat and to find out what's new. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Ms. Paloma Lopez, Regional Secretary General of Comisiones Obreras, Madrid, and to Marina Prieto, Regional Secretary General of Unión General de Trabajadores, UGT, Madrid. And also to our beloved ESC President, Mr. Oliver Röpke.
Thank you.
Welcome, who is here with us, sharing these moments with all our members. Dear colleagues, the Spanish trade unions and the Spanish government have made lots of progress in labor, social, and climate policies in recent years. The impact of the labor market reform passed in December 2021 has been remarkable, with a sharp decline in temporary employment, both in the private and public sectors. This, together with an almost 50% increase in the statutory minimum wage since 2019, has contributed to improve the working conditions of some vulnerable groups, including women, young people, and migrant workers, and has further contributed to reduced earnings inequalities. UGT and CCOO have worked hard together towards the reinforcement of collective bargaining, the reinforcement of the welfare state, the creation of quality jobs, toward the stability in employment, or the guarantee of sustainability of a public pension system. The Spanish progressive government, now acting government, has also demonstrated its commitment to a more just world, to fight inequalities and to turn great transformation into opportunities for the future, laying the economic, educational, social, and environmental foundations for the well-being of future generations. Just last week in Brussels, in the framework of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the EU, which Spain holds during this 6-month period, the acting president, Pedro Sanchez, took part in the Tripartite Social Summit and highlighted the value of social dialogue as an engine of progress for the European project. I'm very much looking forward to discussions with our Spanish colleagues, their take on the future of Spain, the EU, and their analysis of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the EU. I will ask Paloma to kindly take the floor and chair the meeting while I will welcome our next speakers. Paloma, you've got the floor, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. First of all, President of the Group of Workers of the European Economic and Social Committee, President of the Economic and Social Committee, European Economic and Social Committee, President of the Spanish Economic and Social Committee, who's here with us, and all other authorities and members of Group 2 of this European Economic and Social Committee. I want to welcome you all and welcome the managers and directors of Comisiones Obreras and UGT who are here with us. Good afternoon, welcome to this auditorium, Marcelino Camacho Auditorium. As you know, Marcelino Camacho was one of the founders of Comisiones Obreras, and this auditorium is a tribute to his memory and to what he meant and how significant he was to us all. He was one of those thousands of workers who suffered repression, prison, and gave their life literally for the defense of the rights of the working class, democracy and freedom. Welcome also to Madrid, which is the first city that combated fascism in 1936. Now that we are going through historical revisionism, it is very important to know the past in order not to repeat it, because democracy, unfortunately, is not free from threats. To defend democracy is to defend class trade unionism and the rights of workers. Our main aim, is to reach equality and do away with any kind of discrimination in the company and business world and society. There is a wide social consensus on the crises that we face: an ecological crisis, a crisis of democracy which is threatened by the explosion of inequalities and the return of war and authoritarianism, and a crisis of employment in the face of technological change and especially the way that working relations are changing. And responses go from the pessimism of those who no longer believe in the ability to change the world to the optimism of those who believe that political, economic and ecological risks of the present are only problems whose solution is round the corner. This continuistic perspective minimizes the severe erosion of the conditions of life and perspectives of a great part of the population. But there is a third response, which is the one that I like to underline, which is the realistic response. People who are not afraid but full of hope. This is a response that admits and acknowledges that we have to transform our way of life, the world of employment and society, if we want to reinforce our democracies and avoid ecological collapse. And this, we know, means increasing the spaces for reflection and collective action of the working class. And within that project, trade unionism is necessarily the backbone of the whole thing. This task is arduous but necessary. Trade unions are actors and at the same time collective intellectuals, and they play a key role in the elaboration and dissemination of the new ways of thinking. Intelligence, collective intelligence, should be at the service of social transformation on the basis of social justice, and this is a great part of what we do at the Spanish Economic and Social Committee and also the European Economic and Social Committee, and we're very thankful to you for being here. And I will finish by calling for peace. There cannot be democracy without peace. Therefore, it is also our obligation to call for the end of wars, respect of human rights, and demand the compliance with international humanitarian law based on the UN resolutions. And I hope and expect that you have a good working session today and tomorrow, and I thank you once again for being here. Thank you.
Y continúo yo.
And I continue pass the floor to Marina Prieto, Regional Secretary General of UGT Madrid. Well, thank you, Paloma. Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this invitation that you've extended to UGT Madrid so that we can take part in this welcoming event. Trade unionism in Spain and Europe has played a crucial role throughout history, and as is obvious, will also play a role in the 21st century. We are as important as ever, especially with organizations like UGT, which I have the honor to preside in Madrid, and Comisiones Obreras, and all the trade unions which in Europe try to make progress and defend the rights of workers in a world that is constantly changing and full of social and economic challenges. Trade unionism today is still essential to protect the rights of workers, promote social justice, and achieve a more equitable society. But the biggest challenge that we face in these times is inequality. And neoliberal policies have brought us to this pass, to this level of inequality. The advances of the extreme right in Europe and Spain have also had much to do with it, and especially allow me to say that in this region in Madrid, where the right is governing in 13 municipalities of the region, which means an increase of social gaps and moving backwards in terms of rights. The alerts about the grave consequences of the discourse of the extreme right, who deny sexist violence, equality, climate change. They also criticize the 2030 agenda. All this should be considered very thoughtfully by European society. We are changing more and more quickly all the time. Technology, demography, demographics, culture, climate. All these changes will redefine the way in which we live, but also the way in which we work. And these changes are having an effect on the future of the labour market and society itself. And these changes will mean increases of opportunities, but also bigger threats and menaces. Management of change and how it is done can increase opportunities or can increase inequality. To combat inequality demands, first of all, to focus all our efforts on distributing wealth in a way that is just and equitable, and distributing the costs of any crisis in such a way that people, workers still have purchasing power and focusing on increasing salaries. And secondly, with public policies that face up to the consequences of this crisis by supporting and helping to protect the social majority, and especially those people who are more vulnerable. We have to do this for a simple reason, because it's the right thing to do in a Europe which says that it is social and democratic. Social, territorial inequality, the distribution of wealth are two of the pillars of our action and our efforts. Trade unions play a positive fundamental role in the reduction of inequality. That is why we are attacked by the extreme right and the right. Trade unionism has always been the engine for change. The increase of inequality that we've witnessed throughout the process of economic crisis had directly to do with the weakening of employment relations, and specifically with the loss of strength of trade unions. In other words, the existence of strong trade unions that can negotiate reduces inequality and helps to distribute wealth. Today, you are living in Madrid, the region of Madrid, which is the wealthiest region in Spain, and yet has the highest levels of inequality, socially and territorially. It is the region that has the highest gap, 20% between the 20% of the population that own more and the rest of the population who have less. Madrid has been a laboratory for neoliberal policies of right-wing governments, and this region has become the paradigm of inequality. And in this region, 7 million inhabitants, 1.5 million, 22%, are on the brink of social exclusion. But luckily, the policies of the right are made up for with the policies of the government of Spain, which in recent years has helped to build social dialogue and agreements to advance working and social rights. As was said previously, the employment reform, the different laws for protecting vulnerable populations, and for equality. To face the challenges of the present and the future, we will have to promote green employment policies and a policy that is aimed at digital, technological and demographic change that is just and fair, together with training and ongoing training, favours the creation of quality, stable jobs. We need undoubtedly to change with the change of paradigm and go beyond the economic model of the 20th century towards an economy of objectives that increases democracy in the business world and the participation of workers, helping to make up and construct, by participating in the decision-making process, more sustainable, fairer and more societies with a greater level of cohesion. I will finish by saying that trade unionism defends working to emphasize the best in all of us, to put into practice generosity, solidarity, defend the collective interest in the face of the individualistic, capitalistic, neoliberal policies of the right. In the face of the attack of these policies, we have the tools: more struggle, more mobilization, more trade unionism, and support of social dialogue with the business world and governments and democratic participation in companies. Thank you very much. I hope you have a very good session today and tomorrow.
Y yo voy a dar.
And I'm going to pass the floor to the President of the SC, Oliver Repke.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. First of all, dear Lucy, even if she's not here, but I'm really pleased being invited to this extraordinary Group 2 meeting. Dear President Anton Costas, dear Secretary General, dear Unai, and also dear Marina and Paloma, and dear members and friends here in this Workers' Group meeting. It's really a pleasure for me to join you here today, and I had as you all know, I had the pleasure to serving as a president of this dedicated and passionate group during the last years, and I'm really pleased to see how strong this group is and how strong the voice of this group is, and especially now in the cooperation with the Spanish presidency. So in a nutshell, really, thank you very much. And I think we achieved remarkable milestones, fostered connections, and worked tirelessly towards a common goal. Of course, today I find myself in a new role with another responsibility, but I still think that we all in the Economic and Social Committee and all social partners and civil society, we are, in the end, we are following the same goal. We want to have a social Europe, and we want to have an economically prosperous Europe and a Europe of freedom and of fundamental rights. And we are facing, as it was said before, we are facing now multiple crises. We are actually in a permanent crisis mode in Europe, starting with the financial crisis, with the COVID-19 pandemic, and then we had the war, the horrible war of aggression against Ukraine, and now this horrible, I have to say, war and war crimes in the Middle East. And even if this is not on the agenda, please allow me to say some words about this, because this was also part of my statement last week during the plenary session. I was convinced, together with all three group presidents, that our committee cannot be silent in such a moment. As you know, I issued statements after the terrible and terrific terrorist attacks against civilians, and I have to say I still insist on this. We have to condemn this in the most severe way, and we have to insist that the right of Israel also to defend its existence must be respected. But what we see at the moment is not acceptable, that civilians, Palestinians now pay the price, and that we have also horrific attacks on them, on their civil infrastructure. And I think this deserves also the same solidarity and then the same condemnation. They are not terrorists, they are civilians. And I think that was a big achievement that we brought this together, even if not every word could be shared by everybody. But that we could bring this together in our committee. And let me be very clear, colleagues, just 2 days after my statement, the heads of states and government of the EU issued a statement. They found more or less the same words for some of the demands. I myself think we should not dispute if we ask for a pause, for poses, or for ceasefire. I think important is the weapons have to go down, that people can survive and will not be victims anymore. This is the most important thing, and I'm glad that this committee sent this important message during our plenary session. I would then come to the issue of today, social Europe and the strong cooperation with the Spanish government. I have to say I'm glad that this government showed leadership in such a geopolitical uncertain period, where we in the whole world actually see that our multilateral system is put into question more and more. I think it is important that we have strong leadership here in the European Union, and I cannot say it often enough how thankful we are as ESC that this government involved us at a very early stage, and this government is listening to social partners and civil society. I don't have to repeat all the good examples, but many of our members who are here participated already in council meetings or in conferences, presented our opinions, and actually we started some initiatives together with the Spanish presidency, also on issues like competitiveness, but also on green collective bargaining, on democracy at work. I'm really thankful for this, and I think the Spanish government has set really a best standard and a benchmark for this. At the same time, this morning I was in Valladolid. Some month ago, in the last year, I signed a statement together with the president of the employers group, of Stefano Malia, insisting that social dialogue must be respected. And we have been informed by the colleagues of the Economic and Social Committee of Castilla y León that the government in this region did not respect obviously, the principles and the funding of social dialogue. So we signed this statement, Stefano Malia and myself, and I was invited now by the colleagues for a follow-up to address the Economic and Social Committee in Valladolid. I was there, and I have to say, colleagues, I say this because we can see respect for fundamental rights, for social partners, for social dialogue, for civil society on the one hand side, and totally disrespect and undermining the principles are so close, can be so close. So I think we have every day, we have to insist on this, we have to work that those principles must be guaranteed, not only in Spain, but in the whole Europe. And as you know, I put also big emphasis on the countries beyond our borders. I think we cannot start early enough to support also trade unions and employers' organizations and civil society organizations in candidate countries. Therefore, once again, this initiative to involve them in our work must be accompanied with a special focus on fundamental rights. Our fundamental rights group, I think, must insist that social partner structures must be strengthened in these countries. So I will come to an end, but I will just finish with an outlook to the next year. We are facing the European elections, and I think this is a pivotal moment for all of us, and it's a big responsibility for all of us to encourage our members, to encourage citizens to go to the vote, to vote for democratic parties to show that this Europe and the European Parliament, the new European Parliament, will have a strong legitimacy. And here, once again, I'm grateful that our committee decided last week in the Bureau that we will draft a resolution, apart from all the communication efforts we do, also on the ground, also in Spain, but that we will draft a resolution with the main messages of employers, of trade unions, of civil society, and also with the consultation of those civil society organizations who are not in our committee, to have really on, let's say, 2 pages, the main demands and the main concerns of our citizens, of workers, also of entrepreneurs, together, and to see, to put this in the spotlight before the European elections. I think it's a big responsibility for all of us to keep this momentum, this democratic momentum, and I'm really proud that our committee is moving forward in this respect. Yeah, I will come to an end because I think the first Vice President is waiting. Once again, thank you very much for inviting me. I will, of course, continue to listen to this important debate. I wish you all success with this debate and all of us, because I see also representatives of Group 2, of Group 3 and Group 1 are here. I think all of us will make all the efforts to strengthen our committee, to make it more visible, and in the end, to have more impact. So I count on your support, and I would like to thank you for all your support that I've seen in the last month already. Thank you very much.
Damos paso ya a lo que es la primera intervención.
Yes, now we're going to hear from the priorities of the Spanish presidency, opportunities and possibilities with the first Vice President of the Government of Spain and Minister for the Economy and Digital Transformation. And we're also going to hear from Mr. Antonio Costas, who is President of the Spanish Economic and Social Council. And that will be the end of our opening session. We'd like to thank the interpreters, and we leave you now with the next set of speakers. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues. Colleagues, as we gather here today, it is important to reflect upon and appreciate the commitment demonstrated by the Spanish government and therefore its presidency of the Council of the EU, which Spain holds during this 6-month period in promoting an ambitious reform agenda and making progress in labor, climate, and economic policies. The Spanish presidency's desire to continue to strengthen the social dimension during the 6 months is indeed very positive. For instance, in its efforts to make progress and reach agreements with the European Parliament on the Directive on Working Conditions in Platform Work, as well as the regulation on the coordination of the social security and the Directive on the European Disability Card. In promoting greater social and economic justice by advocating for the establishment of minimum and common standards on corporate taxation in all member states and will fix tax evasion by large multinationals. By working for a proper revision of the multi-annual financial framework 2021-2027 and for the adequate reform of the fiscal rules to overcome austerity, increasing transparency and combining the sustainability of public finances with the proper financing of the green and digital transitions. The Spanish presidency has recognized the invaluable role of the European Economic and Social Committee and the Workers' Group in shaping policies and decisions through exploratory opinions and high-level events. Through these exploratory opinions, we have provided powerful insights and recommendations on crucial topics such as democracy at work, the link on mental health and job precariousness, sustainable development, green collective bargaining, social progress protocol, the recovery and resilience facility and cohesion policy, review of the bank crisis management, digital euro, and many, many more. A total 22 requests, and we have fulfilled. Our rapporteurs, our members, have ensured that the workers' voice have been heard and are integrated into the EU decision-making framework. Dear Vice President, let me tell you that we are really delighted to have you here. Please give us your evaluation of the Spanish presidency priorities, challenges, and opportunities for Spain and for the EU. Thank you very much in advance.
Muy buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon.
Address you today, address you all present here and also those that are following us online to exchange some views on the current challenges and opportunities and the state of play as we are at the midway through with the Spanish presidency of the Council of the European Union, and also halfway through our recovery plan after the pandemic. I will mostly speak in Spanish, but maybe also share some, cover in English the final part of my intervention, which has to do with the priorities and state of play of the Spanish presidency. Decía, querido Unai, querido Antón.
Dear friends, it is a great pleasure for me to participate in this meeting and to share with all of you and with the workers group of the European Economic and Social Council some of the priorities, the challenges, and the opportunities when we are halfway through the Spanish presidency of the European Union's Council, and also our program of reforms, our recovery plan after the pandemic. And we're also at a time of deep changes and tension, of terrible conflicts in the world, such as the humanitarian drama in the Ukraine and more recently in the Middle East. Conflicts that have a very severe impact on trade, on the international financial system, on the economy, security, and our societies, of course. Uncertainty is the new normal, and the tectonic plates on which the global order was created after the end of the Second World War are now moving. In some aspects, that leads to clashes, and in others to separations, to lagoons. But what is very clear is that there is a new world order that is being built as we speak. And in this context, it is more important than ever to establish a dialogue, to build bridges, to avoid extreme positions, to listen with attention. It is also very important to be flexible and to have the ability to adapt to new technologies, to climate change, to new ways of working. And I sincerely believe, and I am certain that my dear Anton Costa will say something about this because he always does, it is absolutely essential as well to be ambitious, to have a clear and courageous vision in order to deal with the changes that are necessary, to face challenges, but to also take advantage of the opportunities that come up. Being very clear that yesterday's world is not coming back, but that we do have new tools that will allow us to continue to improve the working conditions and living conditions of future generations. We should never give that up. And in this context, I would like to appreciate and thank you and thank from the bottom of my heart the work of trade unions and also of business representatives and all social partners that in these past 5 years, ever since we came to government, had acted with a great deal of responsibility, listening, reaching agreements, fleeing from extreme positions, showing the ability to adapt to changes and new circumstances, having the courage, the vision, and the ambition with a very clear vision on their role to defend the general interest. Social dialogue has been key in these years to navigate through very moving waters and to reach social peace. And this is a fundamental asset that we need to take care of, that we need to care for as a treasure, because this is a key element to keep on growing and to attract investment and to give confidence to markets and citizens. Ever since 2018, ever since we came to the government, we have implemented an economic policy based on 3 pillars. Fiscal responsibility, always thinking about future generations, social justice, and structural reforms, progressive looking to the future. We had a very clear idea of the changes that were necessary to recover after a decade of many losses, so that we could go back to a path of growth by bringing down inequalities and also increasing our productivity and our future growth. What we did not know then is that we would have to face a pandemic, but we didn't know either that we were going to have a huge responsibility that was based on solidarity, and that we were going to receive an incredible amount of social European funds that has allowed us to build for the future and to modernize our structures in the midterm with green and digital policies so that we can approach the future with more resilience. And thanks to the policies followed these years and the next generation funds, we are modernizing our country. And for the first time in our history, Spain is taking advantage of an industrial revolution heading these new technologies. We have launched 12 strategic investment projects in key fields such as electric vehicles, green hydrogen, renewable energies, energy storage, working on the cycle of water, semiconductors industry, the agro-food industry, all these sectors, all these projects known as PERTES, strategic projects for economic recovery and transformation, will allow Spain to be heading this new green and digital economy. We have launched massive programs that reach the whole of the country to reach SMEs and citizens, programs, for example, to establish or to use solar panels in homes and in businesses. We also have done many reforms like the labor reform, teleworking reform, the pension reform, the education reform, university and scientific reform, for the creation and growth of companies, the startup world, also policies for that, the regulation of work in digital platforms, reform of the litigation, of the tendering process, and we also have many programs to adapt the later framework to new technologies. And all of that we have done through social dialogue. So from the government, it is very clear to us, we want our country to continue the path of growth, stability, and confidence. We want to have a strong voice in international fora. And for that, we need to complete the ongoing projects and consolidate the developments that we have achieved in the past 5 years and continue with an economic policy that works and that is already bearing fruit. After the strong recovery ever since 2021, the Spanish economy continues to grow strong. It is the economy in Europe that has the highest growth forecast in Europe with one of the lowest inflation rates. Today, we received the PCI data, and Spain is one of the European countries with the lowest inflation rate with a significant decrease of underlying inflation, which excludes non-processed food and energies. And we've had an extraordinary performance of the labor market, too. There are more than 21,300,000 people working in Spain, more than 24 million in Spain that are working in our country. The Spanish economy has never recorded such high figures, which reflect this structural change and explain the strength and resilience of consumption and investment. Moreover, the number of people who are part of the social security system is highest than ever. And we also have very important plans for R&D and digital technologies, and that has grown 58%, the use of these technologies. So a lot was at stake after the pandemic, and this is why Spain decided to use European funds, Next Generation, to invest in all these fields. We already received the fourth disbursement. We received 7 billion of Next Generation funds already. We have reached cruising speed in the deployment of investments. About 80% of the funds received, 30 billion euros, are already committed through the different tendering of works by the state and by the autonomous communities. And we have 12 strategic projects that required skilled labor. And fortunately, this policy is taking place in a context where the working population is growing. So we know we will be able to increase employment, investment, and consumption, mobilizing up to 160 million euros with that drive of the supply policy and the modernization of the country. In the next legislation, we will have the aim of achieving full employment and to put an end to the differentiated unemployment rate, differentiated with the rest of Europe. We've had that for decades. And this is a main factor that explains inequality. Because inequality that is in the title of today's session, which is going to be discussed in the other sessions as well, it has been one of the great problems that we have been facing since the financial crisis. And the key element so that we can go back to reduce inequality and make growth more inclusive and fair, and to achieve effective full employment with a plan against the youth unemployment, a plan to fight long-term unemployment, and reskilling programs. Also, the ability to create jobs, which requires, I say, skilled labor in the digital and green markets. Spain, in these past few years, has done its homework. So we are in a situation of relative leadership for some of the important debates that are taking place within the European Union and also at a global level.
Already said at the beginning, the four main priorities of the Spanish presidency. First priority, and I wanted to say it in English precisely to respond to your very kind introductory words, deepening the economic and monetary union with very significant, very difficult and challenging files such as the fiscal rules. We are right now, as we speak, intensifying our contacts with the rest of member states so that we can modernize the fiscal rules and we can ensure that we continue to reduce our debt and deficit to GDP ratios in a manner which is compatible with sustainable growth, job creation, the path to prosperity that has characterized the European economy since its inception after the Second World War. Alongside these very important files are some other ones which could be a monographic for a presidency, such as the midterm review of the multi-annual financial framework, new own resources, etc. Banking union, capital market union, the list is quite daunting. But we have made good progress in the first part of our presidency, and I am confident that we will be able to reach a successful outcome or make as much progress as possible on the other files also by the year end. Second top priority, competitiveness of European companies and strategic autonomy of the EU. Pandemic and now the war in Ukraine has woken up to the fact that we need to reinforce our strategic autonomy with very important reforms such as the energy market reform, which was concluded just a couple of weeks ago, or the files on minimum taxation. I can only agree with the importance that you are giving to the minimum taxation file, where the Spanish presidency and Spain generally in international fora is a driving force with a view to having a minimum tax level for corporate taxation, with a view to avoiding the race to the bottom that impoverishes us all. Third priority, building the European model, the European framework for the new digital economy, with very important files for our present and our future, such as the Artificial Intelligence Act, on which we're intensifying our work with the European Parliament. I also hope to conclude the negotiations under our presidency. And finally, a more specific element of the Spanish presidency has to do with deepening our cooperation with our friends, with our family on the other side of the Atlantic, profiting from the fact that Spain is the gateway between Europe and Africa, the gateway between Europe and Latin America, deepening our cooperation, supporting the conclusion of important trade agreements, but also deepening our cooperation in this new global order which is in the making, where we represent more than 20% of global GDP, a very important share of the world's population, and we have a strong voice that should lead us to also have an influence on the new global order, which is, as I said, in the making. As I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, the current international context demands us to be guided by leadership, vision, commitment, to work together, to listen to each other, to reach consensus, to build agreements, to escape from extreme positions. This is what we have done in Spain for the past 5 years. Social dialogue has proven to be the most successful policy that we could undertake, and we will continue on the same track with the next government that I hope will be formed very soon. Social agents have a very significant role to play in shaping the future, and that is why I am extremely happy and grateful to have the chance to share these thoughts with you here today. Termino con un mensaje fuerte de confianza y de orgullo. De confianza, porque
And I'll finish with a message of confidence and pride. We don't know what the future will bring us. Times are very complex, a lot of challenges, unprecedented, some of them in our lives. But in the last 5 years, thanks to social dialogue and the economic policy that we've pursued, we've been able to face up to the different challenges. We've made use of the opportunities, and we're showing that Spain can lead some of the most important European and global debates. And that should make us feel confident when we face up to what comes if we continue to work together. My final message is a message of pride in a country which is always trying to find fault with itself and always considering that it is below other countries or less able than other countries to lead internationally. I think we have to be very proud, feel very proud, because in these last few years we've reinforced the role of our country. Spain is appreciated and respected in Europe and the world. We've shown that we are able to face up to the challenges and keep our head held high. And this sense of pride and confidence, together with what we've done, my dear you and I, in the last years, will allow us to continue on the road to prosperity, growth, fairness, justice, balance, and greater social equality. Thinking about the present, but especially our children and grandchildren and future generations we work for. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm delighted to listen to my dear friend Anton Costas, and I hope you have a fruitful session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President, for this really impressive overview and for the hope you are giving to us on keeping Europe together by really pushing through the agenda, which is so important and which is so close to our heart, which is the social agenda. Let me continue with welcoming Mr. Costas. Mr. Costas, we can still remember when we've met here in Madrid in May last year in your premises, and you told us that Spain needed a strong social dialogue in order to achieve just digital green transitions. Otherwise, inequalities and territorial imbalances would be so large that it would be socially disruptive and politically unmanageable. While this is true everywhere, Spain has shown that with a progressive government and strong trade unions, it has managed to weather the worst effects of COVID-19 pandemic, and according to the latest OECD economic data, Spain's robust economic growth is projected to reach 2.5% this year. However, there are still some issues to be addressed, such as the environmental challenges, income inequalities, youth unemployment. We would be extremely interested in your analysis of the social pillar and European convergence, a vision from Spain. Mr. Costas, please share with us your thoughts.
President of the European, Vice President of the Spanish government, President of the European Economic and Social Committee, President of the group of workers at the European Economic and Social Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, to me it is a great honor for me, in addition to an opportunity, to have been invited to take part in this event. And I would like, in the time that I've been given, to give you 3 quick thoughts, necessarily quick, about the relationship between the social pillar and convergence and competitiveness of the economy from the viewpoint of Spain, based on the data that the Vice President has mentioned. I would like to give you 3 thoughts. The first one about the evidence that we have of the relationship between the fact that a country has a strong social pillar, an efficient social pillar, and the behavior of the economy. Secondly, I would like also to underline the importance that in order to maintain over time many of the measures that have been introduced in recent years that have been referred to by the Vice President, the importance, in order for that to happen and in order for the social pillar to continue over time, how important economic ideas are. In my opinion, this continuity in time, over time, of the new ideas that have come up in Europe during the COVID-19 crisis and the Ukraine war are still at risk. There is still the risk that they are not, that they do not prevail in time, because the economic theories that are still very influential in our policies can stop this process or even make it go back. Another thing is that the Vice President has said that the world has changed, and I share that. I agree with that. The world has changed in the beginning of this century, in this decade, as it did 100 years ago, and this change will force us, in my opinion, to use a more collaborative economic governance than we have in the past, and I will support here the idea of social dialogue as an instrument which within the world of the economy can be used to strengthen the relationship between the social pillar and competitiveness. Let me go to my first idea. If I wanted to express it using a common ordinary picture or image, I would say that in the same way that we can't drive a car with only one rear view mirror, in order to drive a car safely we have to have 2 rear view mirrors. So in the same way, in order to drive the economy of Europe in this case, we need 2 rear view mirrors. We need to be vigilant of the macroeconomic imbalances, but at the same time we have to be vigilant regarding social imbalances. That's my first idea. I think that today we have clear evidence that a country, an economic area like Europe, if it lacks a social pillar, a strong social pillar and efficient social pillar, it is subject to a loss, an extraordinary loss of growth and well-being as a result of economic crises. And we have clear evidence of this today. If we compare the 2 crises, the 2 last crises, the one in 2008 and the one in 2020, the data, the figures, the empirical evidence are immediate, are almost blinding. In 2008, we had to face the financial crisis and the debt crisis from the perspective of ideas and policies, and there were doubts as to whether the social pillar was necessary to preserve the growth and stability of the economy. The policies that were applied in 2008 in the case of Spain and Europe led, if you remember, to a situation where the economy and society were in the black hole of a recession for 5 years. And in the history of economy, no recession has lasted for 5 years, and in a situation of war. Something was not done right at that time in order to create such a situation. And I would like to point out the fact that if we don't have rules for equitable and fair distribution of the costs of a crisis, the consequences in economic, employment and well-being terms are tremendous. And that is obvious. Nobody would today question that. It is necessary to have just and fair rules for the distribution of the costs of a crisis, and also have social tools that promote growth and well-being. Let's compare what happened in 2008-2010 to what happened in 2020. The crisis in 2020, initially we thought it might have consequences that would be similar or worse than those of the financial crisis. The data were really spectacular. It didn't go on for 3 years. It practically lasted for no longer than 3 quarters. The recovery of the economy, employment and public finances was spectacular. Why? Well, because when an economy, a society, has rules that are just and fair for distributing the costs of a crisis, it can weather those shocks much better, which the capitalist economy will always have to bear. The market economy goes up and down. It has phases of euphoria and phases of depression. It's like a manic depressive, but we can always make those cycles better, and we can do so with a series of measures which in many cases were tremendously innovative. I was surprised as an economist to see how quickly and efficiently and innovatively in Spain and Europe the COVID crisis was faced, and then with the European funds and the national recovery plans and restructuring plans. But I think that this is quite clear today, and we have to be mindful of this. My thoughts come from a report, almost yearly report published by the Economic and Social Committee of Spain on governance of the EU. And in that report you will see, with a greater level of detail, in the annual memorandum, the Social and Economic Memorandum of the Economic and Social Committee, you will see data that support my comments now. But I would be interested, before I leave this and move on to another point, to say that I would like to mention the lesson that we should not forget. Social progress, which is the motto of today's meeting, pushing for social progress is not an automatic result of economic growth. There was a time in the so-called glorious 30s, in the 50s, etc., economic growth almost automatically produced social progress, the creation of the middle classes, especially in Spain, and then came democracy. But after the 80s, and now in a clear way, economic growth in and of itself does not necessarily produce social progress. That is why it's necessary to conduct and drive the European economy like a car with 2 rear view mirrors, with one eye on the macroeconomic situation and another eye on social imbalances, because if social imbalances get deeper, the experience of 2008 versus 2020 tells us that the consequences for growth and welfare are dramatic. And today we have evidence stronger and stronger evidence that good social policies are a very powerful instrument to further competitiveness of the economy and sustainable competitiveness of the economy. I'll give you two quick examples. Today we know that investing in children between 0 and 3 years of age is associated with the greatest economic multiplier that we can envisage. If we invest in people during those ages, up until the 3 years of age, is one of the soundest economic investments that any country can make. In the short term, for children that benefit from that investment, because they will be able to eat better, to have a better education and a better future. Secondly, for the parents, especially for the mothers, in the midterm, because there's an increase in the labour force and the ability of the economy to grow. But if we put our headlights on long beam and look forward 15 years into the future, those children will be the future of talent, dynamism and productivity in our country 15 years hence. That is very important. Another area where we know that it is very important to invest is employment. The degree of inequality that we have is not acceptable. But how can we address this? We have two roads or possibilities to think about: a revolution of redistribution of wealth, like the one that took place in the 50s and 60s. The other way is to focus progress on good jobs for more people in more places in the country. It's obvious that we'll have to do something else in addition to that, but inequality in our country is fundamentally caused by the problem of bad jobs and the lack of employment. We have to focus on employment, and today we have evidence that good active employment policies, when they're associated with the business world, are very efficient. We have evidence, this is another recent report from the Economic and Social Committee, that dual training has a spectacular effect on employment. We have taken the data of the students that did dual training or have done dual training since 2018, and we have created another group of students who have only done non-dual vocational or professional training, and another group of university graduates. All the data that we look at, school dropout levels, the time that elapses between the end of the education process and getting a job, satisfaction of companies, retaining talent, all these indicators are better when people have been given dual training. So we have a lever, we have a kind of middleman that can put together the need that people have for a good job with the need that companies have for good talent and good workers. We have empirical evidence that shows that. The second idea, more quickly, is, as our report on European governance says, it underscores what has been done since the Gothenburg summit, which was a consequence of what happened in 2008, and the Port Summit, and everything that has been done throughout these last few years in the European Union, and specifically in Spain. We have a positive, we value this very positively, but the report has its kind of reservations or concerns, which are associated with the fact that many of the measures that we've introduced are temporary. They are temporary measures, and the report calls our attention to the need to make these measures definite in time. What would I say as an economist? Well, I would say that ideas, John Maynard Keynes said at the end of his book, The General Theory of Economics, he said, ideas more than interests are what are important for the good and for the bad, for the better and the worse. Why did he say this? Because, well, I think we still run the risk that old economic ideas that are still very strong, like the idea that the social pillar is an expense that has to be incurred when things are going well, but that you can do away with it when things are going badly. This idea still has a lot of strength. It's the old Occam law. Occam, the North American economist who in the 1970s was worried about inequality and started to study what relationship there was between equity and social justice and economic efficiency. And when Occam put all those data together, he found something dramatic, that the relationship between social justice, equity and efficiency, economic efficiency, is negative. What does that mean? It means that if you want to improve equity, social justice of society, one must accept the cost of opportunity that efficiency goes down because the relationship is negative. And this is a dilemma, a tremendous dilemma, which caused a lot of problems. And what I want to say is that since 2016, we have new evidence, empirical, very robust empirical evidence that says that if you collect more data from more countries, longitudinal, throughout more time, longer periods of time, and go back to the analysis that Occam did and look at big data, we find a new revelation which says that that relationship is not negative, it is positive. And this, in my opinion, is very important because it confirms, based on empirical evidence, that a good social policy, good social policies, and we underscore good, a good social pillar is an engine for healthier growth and more sustainable growth, and more sustainable in time and in environmental terms. And this is a true revelation, a kind of epiphany, an epiphany which, by the way, does not come from the Vatican. It's an epiphany that comes from the IMF and the business world, which are not institutions that are sometimes too well liked. So, and I address myself to President Oliver Repke when he says in his program, he speaks about the need of conciliating social advances with sustainable competitiveness. Well, today we have evidence that if we want to make competitiveness sustainable and growth healthy, we have to precisely strengthen the social pillar. And finally, I wanted to say something else about something that the Vice President has pointed out in her presentation. She said that the world has changed, and that's obvious, and that we're going to have to do things, not exactly different things, but we're going to have to do things differently. And she mentioned social dialogue as something very important. Now let me introduce an argument from the world of economy in order to support the idea of social dialogue. In the past 2 years, while I've been the president of the Economic and Social Committee, I've realized that often we use the word social dialogue as a kind of chorus, which sounds well, but we're not very aware of why social dialogue can actually improve the situation. And let me give you my opinion and an argument. If it's true that the world has changed, and I do believe it has, the economy of the future is an economy that I would define as Augustine, in the sense of Saint Augustine, Augustinian economy, because what we have is no longer an idea that is only the idea of efficiently distributing wealth, but another idea, which is the idea of trade-off, which does not or should not pursue a single idea or target, but several objectives which are equally desirable, which have elements that conflict or clash between them, at least in the short term. For instance, we want decarbonisation, absolute decarbonisation in the shortest period of time, but we have seen that has to be done together with, we must do that while at the same time we must maintain the security of supply and the security of markets. So how are we going to manage these opposites? Because an economy that only has one objective, efficiency, could lead us to think, well, let's get together the best experts that we know, sit them down and let them decide and tell us what we should do in order to move forward. But if our future economy is going to be a trade-off economy, and I go back to Isaiah Berlin, the great liberal philosopher, who said he defended a pluralistic liberalism that should make compatible, desirable objectives that are sometimes contradictory. And he said that freedom is a desirable goal for any civilized society. Equality is another goal. If you only pursue one of them, you will damage the other. But if you only pursue the other, you will damage the first of the two goals. So what should we do? Well, we have no choice. We have in the future decades to manage this Augustinian economy. If we remember Saint Augustine, who in his Confessions, you know that there's a passage where Saint Augustine says, Lord, make me chaste, but not just yet. This is what we have in front of us. We want decarbonisation, but perhaps we won't be able to achieve it just yet. We'll have to combine that target and objective with making sure that there is a security of supply, so that our industry continues to function. So we have in front of us a trade-off economy, and we cannot manage it using a top-down governance model which has been used in the past when we believed that we knew everything about the future. Today we have a situation of uncertainty. Uncertainty is not a risk, it's the inability to know what risks we're going to face. Uncertainty is like a thick fog that doesn't allow you to see what's in front of you. How do you make progress in the midst of fog? Well, we won't be able to use a top-down model. We'll have to use a more collaborative model of governance. Decisions will have to be made by competent authorities, but the process of decision-making can no longer be a top-down process. It has to be a down-top process. We have to, I think, design a different social contract from the one we had at the end of the Second World War, and I believe that in spite of the drama of our present situation, the experience of the Second World War tells us that good things sometimes emerge from the bad. We had 2 world wars, a huge depression, and when nobody thought that things were going to get any better, society got juster and more efficient. I think we've got to understand this idea that good can emerge from the bad in order to make a fairer, juster world with greater social progress, and that is also efficient. These two things are not contradictory. We have to make them advance in time. It's not possible to have a dynamic, innovative productive economy if it is not based on a fair society that promotes social progress. I have overstepped my time, but I couldn't lose the opportunity, and your presence here, I couldn't overlook this opportunity to tell you what I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Aquí van a poner los
Luego que suban aquí, luego, ¿no?
Pero ya está. Pues, cuando me digan eso.
Y aquí que suba una ahí.
Yo lo que no veo nada aquí con esta luz, ¿eh?
Efectivamente.
Se ve nada, ¿eh?
Está. Deberían poner más. Pero bueno.
No se ve nada. Bueno. Sí.
Creo que una ahí que tienes que subir.
No, hay
Sí.
que pedirle después, no.
No.
¿Comenzamos? Sí. Bueno, buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
I think we can resume. So welcome once again. It's a great satisfaction to see all of you here this afternoon. And for me, allow me to tell you that this is a great honor to have our second Vice President of the government and Minister of Labor, Yolanda Diaz. Thank you so much for being with us, for sharing a few words with us. It's a great honor and great satisfaction to introduce Yolanda Diaz.
Bueno, aunque
Yolanda Diaz, let me say a few words about her CV, because when I need to introduce strong professional women, as we all are, I take that opportunity, because for years I've been working in trade unions, and the CVs of women in the past, they weren't read. So when I have the chance to read the CV of a very strong woman, I take that opportunity to do so with a great deal of pride. So before going into politics in Galicia, Yolanda Diaz, we met her before that. She was elected member of the Galician Parliament. She was in the opposition because there was a right-wing government. And that's when we had the chance to meet her and get to know her, because she was part of the Social Employment and Social Security Committee. And she supported us with a proposal to get a minimum income for citizens. And we were, because this was a popular initiative, and we were asking for signatures, and she supported us in this, in that regard, when she was a member of the Galician Parliament. And then in 2019, she was member of the Toledo Agreement, and we had the chance to work together again to try to get an agreement, because the Toledo Agreement is a association that deals with reforms of the pension scheme. So we worked together again there, and I can tell you that she is a very strong, brave woman. She always defends what she believes in, but she can turn all those ideals into policies based on consensus and social dialogue. And that is one of the things that set her apart from other employment ministers or labor ministers that we've had in Spain. Yolanda Díaz is different because she always believes in social dialogue. She is a labor minister, one of the labor ministers that believes the most in these governance mechanisms, and she always gives trade unions and social partners the place that we belong to be in. Because we know that there are periods where trade unions are not really taken into account and are cornered, whilst Yolanda has done the opposite. She has appreciated our role and made it very possible for us to do our work. So, you have the floor.
Permítanme saludar en primer lugar al...
Hello, good afternoon. First of all, let me greet Professor Anton Costas, who is president of the Spanish Economic and Social Council. Dear Lucy, dear Secretary General of Comisiones Obreras, Unai Sordo, dear Javier, dear friends, I'm going to also like to thank Mari Carmen for her very kind words. I was telling Anton that I didn't remember all those things that you said I did. Thank you for mentioning that. And I want to thank you for your commitment to social justice, your capacity to dialogue, and your good work. So yes, we did share a lot of things back then. And Cristina, allow me to say that the two of them, Pepe isn't here, but neither Unai, Pepe Alvarez, nor Aramendi have done this. These two women made it possible to approve two rules. Out of the two rules that we have approved in social dialogue, these were two of the most complex rules, technically speaking. The Royal Decree 920 and 902, with the development of a tool that was reached by consensus and agreed with in social dialogue, which had to do with transparency in remuneration, with eliminating gender biases on the job, with a tool that was very complex. And since it has to do with women and equality, we don't hear much about it, but it is hugely important. So Maricruz and Cristina, thank you so much for your excellent work. And allow me also to greet all our friends from the Economic and Social Council. Well, first of all, I would like to recognize the European Economic and Social Dialogue for the role they play in favor of social dialogue. It must play a very important role in the European project, and I also want to thank you for the exploratory work that you did. You always help us to prepare the agenda for our presidency, which aspires to be the most social one till now, till the present date. So, social dialogue, you said, is like a chorus, right? We don't really give it the importance it truly has. Our rules are based on dialogue, and I always like the dialogue to reach an agreement. Sometimes you don't get an agreement, but the important thing is the process, the method, because dialogue is what guarantees that the parties that have legitimate interests are designing these things. For example, the royal decree that I talked about on remuneration transparency was not with the agreement of the Spanish Employers Association, but we could feel their presence, and we did take into account their opinion. So it's the method that matters. And in these past few days, with the government agreement that we have reached between the Socialist Party and my party, Sumar, we hear a lot on whether we're going to reduce working hours, if we're going to change layoffs, if we're going to do something about Article 41 of our bylaws. Well, as everything we've done, we will always do it based on social dialogue. But I wanted to take advantage of this forum to say that it is a shame that those voices that UNAI are now asking for social dialogue did not think about it when we had the royal decree known as labor reform, which not only changed important parts of the collective bargaining process, but there was, without any social dialogue, it gave rise to two general strikes in our country, and they didn't have these prejudices that I hear now. I couldn't resist saying this because I want you to have the peace of mind knowing that all the things that we do will be based on social dialogue, good social dialogue. And those who talk about social dialogue now, and I was saying this in a meeting with an important economist this morning, they did not take that into account when they made changes that were very harmful for the Spanish labor market. They talk about it now, but they didn't think about it then. I like to be very clear always in my remarks. And right now that the president of the council, as I said, was uncertain, well, we need to take sides. We are in difficult times, times of war, times of inflation. But what is going to characterize us is what side we're on. And I think we already did that. When the GDP fell by 11 basis points, we were very quickly able to recover the jobs that we had lost, but we changed the labor market. But we are at a crossroads, so I'd like to point to a few things. What Professor Costas was saying, neoliberal thinking, he said, is very strong still. And those policies are not useful for our societies. They deregulated labor in the dismantling of the trade unions. There is no democracy without trade unions. And I said this the other day in a meeting where UNAI was and the Employers Association was there. I say this in the United States. I say this everywhere. There is no democracy without trade unions. And neoliberals have tried to put an end to one of the most important tools that we have, which are trade unions, and undermine labor rights. This is what neoliberals think, and that has been translated into public policies. In the EU, that meant that the important thing were markets and not guaranteeing a social Europe, a solidarious Europe that would eliminate in its functioning social dumping. We need to talk about that as well. And that would convey to the world that we have a working environment with rights. This approach has only caused suffering and poverty. In my country, it has caused a very high youth unemployment rate. In the second quarter of half of 2013, it was almost 27%. There were 6,280,000 people who were unemployed. So these neoliberal policies have made many people lose their jobs. These are the policies of suffering and pain. But they've also caused something which is even more serious, which is disenchantment of citizens. Skepticism. This is very dangerous. They have made it very difficult for citizens to believe in the European project. And it woke up the monster of the ultra-right wing. And we need to talk about these things. This balance is not positive anywhere in the world to reach the well-being that we deserve. And legislating against social majorities, the president of the commission was saying 100 million poor people in Spain. She said, I guess she meant in Europe. Sometimes the data are easy, sometimes they're not. But of course, you can't legislate against a European project that must have the full strength of the world. And it meant legislating against their representative bodies. So those policies are not good, neither in the past nor today. Collectively, we have built with a great deal of effort and determination. We've built a social model that focuses on labor rights and the social state. Those are its key elements. You can't believe in the Constitution only part-time. And if we don't work for a social Europe, we will make a mistake. For decades, we have fought for these crucial instruments for the well-being of the workers in our continent are recognized in the constitutions of our countries. Let's remember the debate we had on that. And now, we're going to defend constitutional agreements that reflect the conquest of workers in Europe. And we're going to defend that, and we're going to go deeper into that as we did in our meeting in Luxembourg 2 weeks ago, I think it was, talking about the need to reduce working hours. And we need to do that also to increase productivity. This morning we talked a lot about this. Manuel Lago was with us, and the non-convergence with Europe, and the need to improve productivity with innovation, with training, but also by reducing working hours. Also to protect the workers vis-a-vis unjustified layoffs, and to do it in accordance with the European Social Charter. We already know what the doctrine is. I was told, well, the vice president said that we can't know beforehand what the price of the value of layoffs is. The TJ said it, not myself. The courts say it, the Court of Justice. The doctrine is consolidated, and it is a democratic anomaly that exists in Spain compared to other countries. But the time has come to guarantee, to articulate high-quality public services, to protect public pension systems, to make more progress in democracy in companies, And the deployment of Article 129 of the Spanish Constitution helps in that regard. So, facing the challenges of transformation, like climate change, and the challenge of digitization, which is a challenge for civilization as a whole. Let's say loud and clear that our social model is non-negotiable. We can negotiate everything, but not the social model. We had the Declaration of Barcelona, and it focused on one of the main principles, which was the right to training. But the social model is non-negotiable. That is what Europe is, and we need to take care of it. And there is no competition between the economic vector and the social vector. We experienced this in the pandemic. What we were told that we had to fight between saving jobs or saving the economy. That's not true. We have proven that saving the productive fabric, companies and workers, we were much more efficient in the economy. So this dispute cannot exist. And this is the social model that we need to give ourselves. We did it in Spain. We proved it by increasing minimum wages by 40%. We also recovered collective bargaining process. We left behind precariousness, and there's a lot yet to be done. We must do away still with precariousness, and also building a mandate that we have learned in our country, which is that faced with a circumstantial crisis or sectorial crisis, we mustn't lay off. We have several mechanisms. We no longer need to lay off people. We need to accompany companies and workers so that this won't happen again. And we did it disassembling the orthodox doctrine. We have 23 million people working in Spain. We have about 10 million women working in Spain. We have affected, or we have implemented rules through social dialogue that have allowed us to converge with Europe in temporary work. We still need a lot to do in the public administration in that regard. The reform that was done in the private sector can be done also for the public sector, and it must be done to correct those dysfunctions that we have. So this is a time to be clear, to defend Europe, but the Europe we want, which is a social Europe. The other day I was talking about this, and I talked to Bernie Sanders and other players in Manchester. We talked about the bad practices of some large corporations. That must be corrected. Large corporations don't must correct what they do, and focus, as I said, on the social project. We're all workers, all of us are. The cleaning lady, whatever, the doctor, the professor, the poet. You're a worker too. We're all workers. And if we do this, we will defend the best Europe we can have. The social Europe that takes people into consideration and that protects the workers before protecting markets. We must leave ambivalence behind. Our societies will be fairer if we show more solidarity, if we say clearly that without social rights, without the well-being of the majority, Europe will fail. That is key. Europe will wake up if we do things properly, and it will do the best it can. And this is a challenge now too. Nobody would have thought that we were going to build a continent that turned its back on the future of workers. That was incompatible with democracy, and Professor Santos talked about this. And it is still incompatible with peace today too. So we must go back to that spirit. That is our challenge, and a challenge that must be based on specific actions. We thought it was impossible to talk in Europe about a directive on minimum wages, and we made it, we did it. And of course, when you do a process like this one, we haven't achieved everything we wanted, but we have made huge progress. And now we have a minimum wage directive in Europe. And this is a very important step forward. I believe that the next step that will affect the civilization as a whole is a platform work directive that will say very clearly that work in the 21st century cannot be done in conditions of the 20th century. Technological progress must be compatible with the respect for labor rights. I was talking to several experts the other day. We were talking about this. This is a challenge for civilization because the risk in a democracy, the risk of mathematical and algorithmic societies is brutal in our lives. Also, the challenge, because we're concerned that ChatGPT has outsourced workers in Kenya, that they pay $2 per hour. So that also concerns us. So this task does affect the whole of civilization. And the work that we do will determine not only the future of our societies, it's already doing so in the present. So we can combine several things. We can combine the respect for human rights with the respect for labor rights. Spain has changed, even though only just a bit these past few years, and the president of the CS said so. I remember this during the pandemic. Andrea Orlando was minister in Italy with a different government. I remember how we worked for the SHUI mechanism. I remember that we had many meetings with the commissioners to maintain this mechanism. The change in government in Italy and in other countries makes this very difficult today, but we have tried. And also we need to talk about the right to defend the European Green Pact. And that is a way to put an end to true dangers for our coexistence, which are not migration or insecurity, but as I said, it's the millions of people who are poor or precariousness in our world.
And in forums like this one, we have the obligation to listen to that Europe, which is real. It exists. We sometimes exclude it from our discourse, but we make a mistake in doing so because we have to move forward. As the president of the Economic and Social Committee said, jointly. We cannot exclude anyone because we'll make mistakes. And we have the historical responsibility of converting that common sense that we built collectively during COVID in 2020, convert that into a new social contract for the whole of Europe. And that idea, that goal, is behind the agenda of the Spanish presidency of the EU. In these last few years, the employment agenda in Spain has been ambitious. We've achieved agreements in terms of social dialogue. I won't go into details, but we've also identified three great goals within employment. One, social dialogue, and I think we're achieving that. Europe is working towards this and talking about this. New governance that is based on social dialogue in Europe. We cannot have a social Europe without strong social dialogue. And I hope that social actors ratify the two agreements that are pending for disconnection and for working from home. because people work in better conditions, decent employment and social economy. But we're also addressing very innovative debates. I would like to go into what we've done in the first few months of our presidency. What we said, social dialogue, was the core of the EBSCO meeting on the 14th of July in Madrid, which led to specific proposals at the tripartite social summit last week in Brussels. Spain and Belgium presented a paper to reinforce the role of that summit and to make sure that the tripartite dialogue is part of the design and execution of all European social policies or public policies. That summit the idea was to add value to that summit, like for instance evaluating our agreements and monitoring them. And on the 19th of October we signed the Barcelona tripartite agreement with Commissioner Schmidt. The Swedes, the Belgians and all the European social actors signed a declaration to support the European Year of Competencies and guarantee training throughout our people's working life. It's the first tripartite agreement to be signed in the EU since 2016. Decent and employment based on rights is another priority. We've made progress in that area. We've concluded the agreement between the Council and the Parliament for the new directive for protection against asbestos. I come from a region where there are 5,000 victims of asbestos and I'm very familiar with this problem. We've also pushed forward the Council's decision to authorise Member States finally, and I'm looking at Mari Cruz and Cristina and Mari Carmen, the ratification of the 190 Convention of the International Labour Organization regarding harassment at the workplace. We've managed all other member states to ratify this. This has been blocked for 2 years, and now the time has come to address this reality. And finally, another advance in terms of decent employment, which is the EBSCO approval at the meeting that I mentioned on the measures regarding mental health and employment stability based on the measures that were approved in April by the Economic and Social Committee. This issue is something that must be addressed collectively, and this is indispensable for a social Europe. Another priority of ours is the social economy. In Spain, you know how important it is. In other countries, it accounts for 10% of the GDP, but its development is very uneven in the rest of the European countries. And the recommendation of the Council's approval will be the first EU text regarding this kind of initiative, and I think that's an excellent piece of news. And to finish this, I will announce that the next cycle of the 6-month period in Europe will include the social convergence framework, which is another topic where we've had the support of the Economic and Social Committee. Pierre Yt and I, the Belgian Vice President, and I have for many months been working on this. And if we want to talk about the social Europe, we must talk about these factors. It's not just a question of giving macroeconomic recommendations. As the President of the Economic and Social Committee said, we might have a lot of growth, but if we have poverty in terms of employment or childhood poverty, things won't go well. So we need indicators that are social and that allow us to strike a balance between these two things. And there must be a balance between EBSCO and ECOFIN. Nobody's superior to anybody else, but we've shown during COVID that EBSCO and social agents have made it possible to manage things differently. So that deep neoliberal discourse which says that ECOFIN should be above EBSCO, what's the reason for that? Why should that be? And I will keep quiet for a second, because that makes sense since Margaret Thatcher or Hayek. It's a profoundly neoliberal discourse where the only thing that is important is market rules. But if our conference is called Pushing for Social Progress, that cannot be the case. We can grow a lot, but if growth is not good, we will be developing societies that are deeply unequal and unfair at a tremendous social cost. The biggest social cost you can imagine is having people with mental health problems or unemployed or disaffected, as is the case in many parts of Europe. In this respect, this is a proposal that, as we know, had as its objective identify social and employment gaps with a feminist perspective and to give quick responses and agile responses to any kind of economic imbalance. And we're firmly convinced that governance is only efficient when it is socially just and ecologically sustainable. I want to thank Commissioner Schmidt because he has given the Belgian Vice President and myself full support, and also the President of the Government of Spain, who's also given us full support. We've got 2 months ahead of us in our presidency. We want to continue to achieve new goals in the areas that are still pending. And I hope that soon we can conclude the social agent negotiators agreement, and I think it's very important to send that message. For too many years the EU has legislated without the participation of social agents. It would be a great piece of news to hear that the EU legislates on the basis of social dialogue and with the participation of social agents. We need more directives that are based on social dialogue, that are faster, and I've said this before in the past few days. We need European standards that are sometimes so slow, so ponderous that they're far removed from the citizens. And we must also continue to strengthen social dialogue. We hope to have the conclusions at the end of November at the EPSCO Council to adopt them. And we also have 2 topics: democracy at the workplace and green collective bargaining. These are tasks, fascinating tasks for us. I always say that, and I quote Supiat, the judge, you cannot have a fair transition without including the business world and workers. And if there's some place to begin, it should be collective bargaining. Business people and workers come together in collective bargaining, and if we promote collective bargaining in transport, for instance, and we promote public transport for workers, that obviously will improve other areas, especially in big cities. Yesterday, a Galician economist, Alvino Prada, talking about working hours, said that on average people take very long to get to their workplace in big cities. And he was mentioning the average time that it takes for a worker to get to their workplace. Well, if we negotiate this well, and it will become a green collective bargaining process, and we will be able to use public transport instead of private transport. We live in societies where an investment fund can, in 2 seconds, delocate a company, and the workers, affected workers in any place of Europe, cannot say anything. And I think that this is one of the biggest challenges of our current work. We must open up the bodies, governing bodies of companies, the decision-making places. In Spain we have examples of Avantia, for instance, a public company where workers are part of the boards of management, but there are some areas like the Basque Country where they do this frequently and things go better. It's not something dangerous, it's something very good for companies. Just to give you some examples. And green collective bargaining is, I think, the key to make sure that climatic conditions are reflected in collective bargaining agreements so that nobody is left behind if the transition is done top down and becomes what, and economists talk about this a lot, in another industrial reconversion that is not done properly, we will be mistaken. So we have to introduce all these changes with the participation of the business world and workers, and also have employment training that adapts and adjusts to decarbonisation, and the best tool for that is green collective bargaining. You're the best people to say what training should be given or to guarantee mobility in the employment sphere. We're working to conclude the trilogues between the Parliament and the Council and the directive to improve protection of people against lead and other chemical agents, which is tremendously important. As you know, it's a difficult negotiation, as it was in our country, in similar situations, and that's all I need to say. We are investing our best efforts in the Digital Platforms Directive. I want to be as neutral as possible because Spain is now the president of the EU, but I will give you a small brief thought about this. I think that we have to be aware that we cannot legislate and not be at the same level of the doctrine, of the legal doctrine that we have in Europe. I think workers would not understand if we are bound to the different judgments of the European courts. I think workers would not understand that we gave the go-ahead to a directive that does not meet those European standards. This directive is undergoing a process of discussion. The text comes out and the committee adopts a text that emerges from the Spanish presidency, or was not, or that came out of then the Swedish presidency gave up on this, but we, I want you to know, are committed together with the social agents and the European Commission, and we're doing our utmost. It's very difficult to put all this puzzle together, but we believe that we must respect that minimum standard, which is almost the standard of common sense, because if the courts are passing judgment on these issues without prior standards existing, I think common sense should prevail. But in any event, we must try to make sure that the use of algorithms, privacy, protection of privacy, everything that has to do with new digital economies respects human and employment rights. And finally, and I'm going to finish, there are two new proposals that are going to come out, very important, which I don't think we will be able to adopt for lack of time, which will have to be dealt with by the Belgians, which are fascinating. We're working on them a lot, and it has to do with the European Employment Councils. We're working with Belgium a lot. And number two, it's fascinating because we've been through it, the statute for internships and quality practices at companies, and this is key. It's very funny to see how European courts and the doctrine of Spanish courts have resolved everything regarding what's been incorrectly called the internship statute, and has decided what an intern cannot do. An intern you cannot use any pictures or images of interns, you cannot publish any picture of interns, you cannot publish anything that is written by an intern. All the courts tell you this clearly. If it's published, it would be unacceptable, because these are training agreements, and I think that often this is a topic that is misunderstood. We already have an agreement on these matters in Spain, and the Socialist Party and Sumar, my party, have agreed on this. But these two directives, as I was saying, for the Belgian presidency are going to be very important, and the Vice President knows that you will have the full support of the Spanish government. And I'm going to finish. The other day I was reading a book by Astra Taylor, a Canadian writer, who in the book reviews the historical concept of security. And she says in the book that security was always something that was considered to be right-wing and conservative, but it is really a truly progressive value in the world of today, in spite of the temptation of authoritarianism to say that security is an exclusive attribute of the right. I think that we are living, as Professor Costas said, in a very uncertain period of time, and we are more than ever responsible. That's why I'm quoting this book, to offer people safety and security. And I think that we should do this in the whole of Europe, because these are difficult times. And I think that what we did during COVID, which was horrible, we really made businesses and workers feel safe. And we have to continue to do this. Safety is not a concept that we should fully promote and develop in the workplace, at home, in the economy, regarding the climate. People are dying because of this, and we have to also give people social security and safety. People have to have a proper house, decent housing. It's key for a social Europe, and we have to also promote what we already know that works. We've been told that increasing the minimum wage destroyed employment, and that is not true, because we've created thousands of jobs in Spain. And I'm going to finish. This is another huge advancements of social states, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, and that is to turn the formal values of liberalism in material values. So if we do it that way, security is not only legal. I saw in the financial press these last few days, there's been a lot of talk about legal security and safety, but it's not just a question of legal safety and security, it's a question of material security, which must be guaranteed to everybody in order to exercise the risks and threats of a precarious society that doesn't really make anybody's life better. We should, in a word, if you allow me, we should remember that what the Socialist Party and Sumar, my party, have signed and agreed upon in the last few days, is an attempt to provide certainty, security and safety to our country. And of the 230 measures that we have introduced, some of them will be more fascinating, some of them less fascinating, some of them will be more brilliant, some of them will be less brilliant. But I do believe that these agreements between the two main parties will continue to help us transform our country. We are doing this on the basis of what is possible we are not trying to introduce any measure that is not feasible. It's absolutely feasible. And at the same time, we're trying to promote democracy, economic democracy, and we're trying to reduce inequality in a country that has huge inequality problems, that addresses the green revolution, the feminist agenda, and working rights. Professor Costa has mentioned educating children. We, in our agreement, have managed to universalize childhood education from the age of 3 and even from the age of 2. So this is tremendously important, and we're going to do it universally for everybody. And this really, I think, improves the life of people and makes a country better. A country that must be in the front line of the social Europe that we want, the greener Europe that we want, and the more democratic Europe that we want. And I will now put my hat on as Minister for Employment, temporary Minister for Employment, and tell you that we've got a huge amount of work to do, and I'm sure that you are aware of this. Social agents are going to sit around the table again to continue with social dialogue. We don't have the employers' representatives here, but in room number 4 of the Ministry of Employment, we're going to discuss all this by sitting around the table, and we're going to continue to show to Spain that we are doing our best. And I'm going to finish by saying thank you. I think this is the way ahead. I want to thank the European Economic and Social Committee, because your successes and your support help us to move into a better Europe. And I will finish, and Mari Carmen mentioned this at the beginning, by saying that we've made huge progress. And I think that it was the first time in Spanish democracy that workers and trade unions were spoken of so strongly when I started out in politics. I think that this is tremendously important for this country. You've done it, and you continue to do it, and continue to promote our good work, and you've shown that what you used to do years ago in the opposition, what you did in the streets, what you did in your technical reports, showed that all this was possible. And you were right. I remember years ago, I used to, when I was in the opposition, I used to look at technical reports from trade unions, and it wasn't a series of abstractions. In 3.5 years, we have deployed many of those ideas that you reported in your technical reports, and they have worked well. So thank you for what you've done. I think that the future of Europe is at stake here. And in you are the future of Europe. Workers, unemployed people, women, and you are tremendously important in terms of making Europe a social Europe in these sad times of war, when we see that so many parties are defending, once again, reaction, that are defending banning trade unions, as we heard the other day, Unai, Oliver, at the Tripartite Summit, this was spoken of. And in these times, when we need a greater Europe and a much more democratic Europe. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart and encourage you to continue with your good work. You have taught me, I was taught at home, I'm heavily criticised because of this, but I was taught that when you enter into a dialogue, nobody wins. There are no winners and losers in a dialogue, in a conversation, and that's a good thing. Somebody wins, that means that something went wrong. And I think that when you sit down to talk and enter into a dialogue, and you're going to do that now. I'm sometimes the referee and I have to suffer the punches from both parties or all parties involved, but you will see that we do our best. And I think that this is the most important value that we have at this time. And we have to make sure that it prevails in Europe, because if not, people are going to be left behind. And that is not something that we can afford. So thank you for the invitation, and carry on with the good work. We will continue to demand reports and work to improve people's lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just a few very the Spanish approach on social agenda, social progress, and the importance of all the elements all the three of you have mentioned here. We would have been much, much, much more further, but definitely you can count on the ESC and on the workers group especially to be backing you and to be bringing the issues you are putting on the table further together with you. So thank you so much.
¿No? ¿Ahora? Ahora. Bueno, muchas gracias. Despedimos a Yolanda y...
Thank you very much. Now we continue with the panel. Unai, Cristina, Mari Carmen.
Sí, ya. Tenemos un problema.
We have a problem. All these presentations were fascinating, but we're running 1 hour and 15 minutes late. So I beg of you, could you please be briefer than you perhaps plan to be? Because we've got to yet have the other panel on collective bargaining. We're going to give you 10-12 minutes each. So I'll be very brief. We have here the leaders of the two biggest trade unions in Spain, UGT and Comisiones Obreras. They are based on law in Spain. There's a process of elections in the trade unions and everybody votes. And we have another trade unionist here, Aitor Murguia. He is a representative of the Basque Country trade unions. But UGT is the oldest trade union in Spain, 1888, founded by Pablo Iglesias, and then the younger trade union that was created in Franco's time, Comisiones Obreras, at the beginning of the 1960s, founded by Marcelino Camacho. Well, that's debatable whether he did it on his own, but he was the leader in in the opposition to the dictatorship and then during democracy. I introduced Cristina, who's a biologist, and she's an expert on work or employment risks. She comes from La Rioja, where some of the best wine in Spain is produced. She's worked in food analysis, and her work as a trade unionist began in her region She became General Secretary of the General Union of the Rioja Workers. In Spain, trade unions are probably more important than in other places. We have territorial and regional organizations, and she was elected Secretary General of UGT in 2016, the Spanish Confederation, and re-elected in 2021.
Algunos dicen que
Una is from Bilbao, not only from Bilbao, not only she's Basque, she's from Bilbao, but he doesn't like to show off of that. He worked in the timber industry, and he became a trade unionist at a very young age. He started with a youth group in the Euskadi trade union. And then he was in Vizcaya, which is his province, and then he ended up in the Basque country, Comisiones Obreras Trade Union. Then he was elected Secretary General of the Confederation. And he started his second term in 2021. He likes lots of things like photography, and he just published a novel recently. So, Cuentos de Oficio is the name of his book. So, Cristina, why don't you start? Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Before I greet everyone, I want to buy your novel, Unai. So, say one for me. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you to the Council for inviting me. I mean, we had lots of things to say. Many of them were already mentioned by the different speakers and the first and second vice presidents. And Anton, it's always a pleasure listening to him. So on behalf of UGT, let me just summarize in 10 to 12 minutes what my colleagues had prepared for this meeting and give you the vision of the UGT of the Spanish presidency of the European Union. In terms of labor and inequality between men and women, there were lots of expectations on the Spanish presidency to try to unblock many things that were on the table. She already talked about the Convention 198 of the ILO. It's very important for many countries in Europe to ratify it. That convention that talks about violence at the workplace, which is usually suffered by women, sexual harassment on the job. Therefore, it is very important that Spain has been able to unblock this ratification before the European Commission. This afternoon, many challenges were mentioned, and one of the main challenges, or the greatest challenge, is social dialogue. Social dialogue, which is so fundamental, that we do practice in Spain, but it's very difficult for the EU, for those directives, as Yolanda Díaz said, it's very difficult for them to come through within the framework of social dialogue. We have achieved many things. We have faced the crisis. Professor Anton also mentioned this. We faced this crisis in a different way than the way we faced the crisis in 2009, 2010. And when we broached that crisis, we realized that workers can be protected. In our country, there were more than 5 million people who were left unemployed in the year 2007, 8, 9, 10. This year, the professor said so, we were able to protect more than 3.5 million people who were in temporary layoffs, and the labor market opened again for them, and they were able to go back to their jobs. The key elements of the Spanish presidency of the EU have been social dialogue, but above all, democracy on the job, and establishing ways to participate so that workers can decide how, when to do things. And Spain is an example of participation and efficacy in making these decisions. Something else that was discussed, but only in passing, was the reduction of working hours. In UGT, we asked for 32 hours a week, but this claim that we have and that we need to continue to defend in Europe, in that agreement that the Vice President mentioned, we hope that within the framework of social dialogue, we can also continue to make progress in reducing working hours a week to more efficiently implement the European pillar on social rights. So thanks to the effort of my colleague, Mari Carmen, we have drawn up a pilot project on the subject that we call Less Hours and More Well-Being. And with that, we want to prepare the way forward for a new working hour program. So to support in a real and effective way the distribution of work, so that the distribution of work can turn into a true right for all individuals. It is also essential for wages to remain at the same level. This is why it is so important to approve the directive on minimum wages. And we have also the directive of wage or remuneration transparency. These two are very important. And in our country, it has been proven that they have a direct impact on working women. Why do I say this? Let me give you some data from Spain. Out of the 3 million people who collect the minimum interprofessional wage, 2 million are women. What have we achieved within the framework of social dialogue? Where that the salary gap or wage gap in our country has fallen by 2 points. This is why it is important that beyond these directives like that of minimum wage and transparency, we should be very clear in how these directives are transposed in the different European countries to face those structural inequalities that we have. And the salary gap, the wage gap, is certainly one of the most important inequalities that exist between men and women. Also very important for UGT is a tax reform and the governance reform. We must protect investments with social objectives to have the double transition, digital and green, a fair transition that social partners talk so much about, as far as not to leave anyone behind. But that has to be true. We shouldn't leave anyone behind. So it's very important to agree to this, but make sure we don't leave anyone behind. And so as not to leave anyone behind, it is extremely important to agree and negotiate with the participation of entrepreneurs, trade unions, and civil society. Very important. We're talking again about austerity in the Commission and in the European Union. In our trade unions, we are absolutely against that austerity. We've seen that with austerity, we don't make it. We don't come out of the situation in good conditions. We don't come out of the crisis. So we encourage you to be on December the 13th in the demonstration that we're going to have against that, all those possible rumors that we're already hearing about austerity and cutbacks for countries that go beyond a 3% GDP to debt. Environmental transition, extremely important. But I studied biology, and 20 years ago we already talked about the green transition and green work, and we still talk about this. So once and for all, with this economy of St. Augustine that the professor mentioned, slowly, baby steps, but making progress, we have to approach that green transition, because we don't only have plan A, we don't have option B. We really have to reduce all emissions, but obviously we must also think about the workers of all these sectors. Very quickly now, digitization, artificial intelligence. Just as I said that minimum wage, wage transparency, and digitization and artificial intelligence, we must be very careful because of the impact it might have on the labor market. Not only the discrimination that women suffer when accessing the labor market, but the biases in artificial intelligence when it comes to job offering. I'm talking about discrimination by gender, by race, by origin. It is fundamental that behind that artificial intelligence, behind digitization, there must be people. People who can deal with these new implementations, but with a gender perspective that is real, and also that respects equality. And I finish. Something fundamental for UGT, public services. Public services, not only must we not cease to approach the consolidation, but we must extend the framework, the network. So no consolidation. What we need is a wider network of services. We must speak once and for all of the economy of care, but in capital letters. We are an aging continent. It is very clear to us who the carers are. Women are the carers. And once and for all, from the European Union, we must approach that agreement that must be reached in the field of care. And co-responsibility is essential. And for that, public services are essential. We talked about universalization from 0 to 3 years. Very interesting how the directive is going to be applied for co-responsibility of the carers as well as the people they care for. All these new permits or leaves, but co-responsibility is essential. It cannot only be women who care. Men must also join that effort. So care must be also a main pillar to deal with within the EU. And I finish with something that I needed to mention. We have the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. That's on October the 25th. That's the day we celebrate that. The EU is negotiating a directive on violence. We are trade unionists, we are representatives of workers, and there are colleagues that are having a very bad time at the workplace, but also having a very bad time outside of the workplace. In our country, many women have been killed this year only because they are women, for no other reason than that. And as democratic society, as a fair society, as trade unionists that we are, we can not turn our back on what is happening. We must protect our colleagues at the workplace. This is why it is so important how we develop this directive on violence. Violence at the workplace, but also at home. I think I went over my time. I tried to be as brief as possible. I'm sure I left out many things, but I do believe that the Spanish presidency of the European Union has been a presidency that has been very fruitful, a presidency where all of us have been working very hard. And I believe that with our Belgian colleagues that will have the next presidency, we will continue to work with them to try to continue to make progress in a fair, more democratic, and more social Europe. Thank you.
Bueno, pues
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by thanking Oliver and the CESE. Thank you, Oliver, for being here for the trade union. It is an honor to welcome our colleagues from Group 2, although they're not here because they had some other commitments, but I would like to recognize the involvement of the Spanish presidency. Thank you to the two ministers who were here, the two vice presidents who were here. And let me also thank the president of the Spanish Economic and Social Council, Mr. Anton Costas, Professor Costas, as we call him. I think he's a wise man. I don't know if you are of the same opinion, but we're very lucky to have him. And people demonstrate that they are wise not only when they speak, but when they listen. And Mr. Costa is still here listening. And that says a lot about a person like him. Now, for time reasons, so as not to go over my time and not going over working hours, because that's what we ask of companies. Let's do the same here. We don't want our interpreters to work overtime. So I'm going to stick to the 10 or 12 minutes that we have been allotted. So I'm just going to be able to give you 2 or 3 messages. Of course, I could talk hours about this, but for time reasons, let me just summarize my opinion of the Spanish presidency of the EU. First of all, it has limited my opinion because it isn't over yet. And we still don't know what the final balance is going to be, because it will depend on, to a great extent, on the debate on the renovation of the governance framework in the EU, which is going to be essential to drive forward some economic policies or others. And the balance, in my opinion, will depend on how that debate ends. That's my opinion. The European Union would be making a huge mistake if it opted for a renovation of the governance framework that is much too rigid, where we will go back to requirements in the evolution of public deficit in the states of the Union at accelerated paces, which are incompatible with an economic growth process, which, as I will try to explain, has given very different results in the management of the last crisis if we compare it to the crisis we went through more than a decade ago. Anton said it, and the two vice presidents said it, and Cristina said it as well. But I would like to mention it again, because you are colleagues from other countries. And so I wanted to make a comparison not only of the management of this crisis and the use in it of social dialogue, which has been very effective, but to compare how, generally speaking, economic crises have been faced in Spain. All economic crises, ever since the oil crisis of the 70s, were managed through internal devaluation processes with different characteristics. Mainly these contributed to a gradual flexibilization of hiring practices in Spain. We trade unions said that it was making hiring more precarious, and it was dealt with by making it easier for companies to lay off workers. So they thought that the way to adapt to changes in the economic cycle was to make laying off easier. They reduced the role of collective bargaining, and generally speaking, we came out of the crisis with our productive fabric having been undermined because of industrial reconversions in some cases, or in other cases because a whole industry like The construction industry crashed 10 years ago, and we lost about 10 million jobs in just one industry, the construction industry. So these were the formulae that were used to solve the crisis. And it was a country with a weak industrial fabric and lots of historical deficiencies. Well, in this crisis, I'm talking about the crisis of the pandemic and everything that came after that, with the support of social dialogue, it has been proven that doing things differently, the results, the outcomes were not only fairer, but it has been proven that they have been proven to be more efficacious from the economic point of view. So, before it was thought that layoffs were necessary and other measures that were very harmful for the workers were necessary, and now we have proven that doing things differently, the outcomes have been better. And wages were increased. The collective bargaining now plays a more important role. Purchasing power is better now for most citizens. We have reduced temporary jobs in Spain because there were lots of temporary jobs and lots of layoffs. We put an end to that. And the result of doing all these things at the same time, of course, after reaching an agreement, but after taking these measures very quickly, one after the other, this has led our country to recover faster than ever employment levels. We have reached a historical record of contributions to the social security system, and we are in better conditions to deal with the transformations and transitions that will be necessary not only in Spain but in the rest of the world in a very complex geostrategic situation. I'm talking about ecological digital transformation and also reconfiguring the social model, taking into account the necessary inclusion of the pillar of care to the social contract for the 21st century because we have the aging of all European populations. So we are in a better situation to approach these matters. And there are two things that I wanted to mention as well because I think they are hugely important. How do we manage, how do we govern these transformations and transitions? It has been pointed to here, so I won't say much about it. But the ability that employment policies, active employment policies have, that capability must be multiplied. They haven't been useful, historically speaking. They haven't been useful, these active employment policies, in no countries, I would say. But policies to detect training and skilling needs that will exist in an economy that changes very fast. Being able to transform those skills that will be necessary in the future and translating that into permanent training plans for all workers and taking this not only for large corporations but for all companies, I think is one of the great challenges that any country faces in employment and active employment policies. On the other hand, changing the incentives system that affect the economy. The incentive system has been changed in this last period with better outcomes. Stability on the job reinforces the trend and the wish, if I may, that companies and workers have a shared interest, for example, in permanent training. In a model of instability of workers that you use and throw away low-cost jobs, that incentive disappears. In the same way, wage increases, the lowest wages, even with the rigidity of the interprofessional minimum wage, has proven that that has very good incentives on companies. It favors the best companies, although it might go against the worst companies, but in aggregate global terms, it does give rise to a positive impact on the economy, on companies, and on wage conditions, and democratization of working relations. The best way to consolidate long-term business projects is that from companies have a long-term view, a long-term interest, and them making these labor relations democratic with a role for workers, I think, is an element to favor those long-term projects. And let me end with what I said at the beginning. I think that in this sequence, where there has been a change in paradigm in managing this crisis compared to prior crises, the great challenge that Europe faces is not going back to the old mistakes and old recipes. And I'm referring to the alignment of most of the EU countries, some very powerful countries like Germany itself, to go back to having a governance framework that can help countries that are weakest. It would be a mistake going back to the past. We have proven that through next generation funds, through EU funds, Europe was able to better face the crisis. We cannot go back to asymmetries in Europe. The industrial plan of the Green Pact means that we can reinforce with public resources energy transitions in countries that have a stronger financial and fiscal muscle. But if there are no common resources, it might give rise to a huge asymmetry in the countries that don't have that financial and fiscal muscle, and at a time of great geostrategic issues with what is happening in Palestine or the war in Eastern Europe. The situation of instability and uncertainty is another great risk for Europe. But, and I will finish with this, we are at a time where we are reconfiguring the globalization model that we've seen in the past few decades, since the 70s or 80s. I think that we don't know to what extent that deglobalization model is going to happen, but things are changing, supply chains are changing location, and industrial policies are changing. Today, the industrial plan of the Green Pact is a way of going against the policies that the U.S. is doing, supporting their industries, supporting relocation of productive processes which were outsourced to other parts of the world, and supporting the energy transition that is no longer an option. It will happen, looking for comparative advantages for industrial relocation. Europe must be part of that debate, and it cannot do so opening up asymmetries without strengthening common resources and going back to austerity policies, to policies that mean that countries must take measures in reducing public spending. I think it would be suicidal, but I also believe that it might bring about political consequences in the Union which would be dramatic, because this is another characteristic, and with this I truly will end. The risk of going backwards in the EU is very clear, and that would have to do with reactionary proposals and anti-European proposals against integration of Europe. We cannot feed into the extreme right discourse. Europe must have more integration, fiscal integration, because the way we manage the pandemic has proven that things can be done differently, and if by doing so, the outcomes are better in terms of the economy and in social terms as well. So that's all from me. This is not a very precise evaluation of the Spanish presidency, but I think that in 12 minutes, it would be having impossible to give you more. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Unai, because we're running very late, and I'm sorry that it hasn't been possible for you to talk more, but we've had to summarize. And we have another panel. And if each of the panelists on the next panel speaks for only 10 minutes, we will have perhaps 10 minutes for questions from the floor. So thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much, Unai. And now in the next panel, the presentations will be even briefer.
Como dirigen los españoles, hablamos mucho.
As you have seen, we Spaniards speak a lot. We have a lot to say.
Vicente es la...
Vicente, Maricruz Vicente, is the Confederal Secretary of Trade Union Action for Comisiones Obreras. She's in the Basque Country, Álava, many other regions, provinces, working in trade union action. She's been in many different associations, and she is now the Confederal Secretary, as I said, of Trade Union Action at Comisiones Obreras. You have the floor with no further ado. Well, good evening. I want to also greet everyone. I haven't got much time, so I would just say that I'm delighted to be at this extraordinary meeting of the workers' group of the European Economic and Social Committee, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here. And I'm sorry, but I won't have time to go into everything that I thought, but everything that's been said refers to that significant social dialogue that has developed in the course of the last, in recent times. But I think that it's important to say that social dialogue in our country is one of the elements that's contributed to regulating our social and employment system. Social dialogue is part of the history of our democracy, and it has been key in the process of consolidation and development of our social and democratic state. We, social agents, in the past years have shown how prepared we are to and how open we are to dialogue and negotiation. But there have been different levels of intensity in the work that we've done, which has to do with the fact that there is no institutional participation law in our country to regulate social dialogue, and therefore development of social dialogue is really in the hands of the different governments. And the absence of legislation on social dialogue meant that during the 2008 financial crisis there was no attempt to look for negotiated solutions to face that crisis. And we've been through a long decade, almost a long decade of without any kind of tripartite social agreement. And it was during those 10 years that some reforms were introduced which led to the profound transformations of the employment market, the savage employment reform introduced by the Conservative Party, the Popular Party, which limited collective bargaining and the activity of trade unions in order to reduce wages in our country. But that employment reform also meant that there was a transformation in the business and economic activities that led to a new social and economic reality that was associated with risks in terms of more and more precarious employment, worse conditions at the workplace, and a worse quality of life of individuals in our society. At the end of 2018, there was a vote of no confidence, which went ahead and led to a new government, which was taken over by the Socialist Party, and a social dialogue process began to try to reverse the employment reform of 2012. Spain then went through difficult times. There were 2 trade union election processes, and there was a temporary government for a long time, which limited social dialogue. In 2019, the general elections in November led to a progressive coalition government who based the social dynamics on social dialogue, and that began to led to the introduction of measures to change the employment reform of 2012, which unfortunately in 2020 came to a standstill as a result of the eruption of COVID-19, and we had to stop everything in order to face the health crisis. There was an agreement that was planned initially between employers' organizations, UGT and Comisiones Obreras, which became a tripartite agreement that was current during the COVID crisis, that led to a series of agreements to guarantee employment during that period. And this way of addressing the COVID-19 crisis in our country through social dialogue had very significant positive consequences, because it prevented the destruction of 3.5 million jobs, and thousands of companies were rescued and saved in our country. So that way of addressing the crisis, Unai mentioned this too, made economic recovery easier, faster, and helped to save jobs and employment. With the introduction of vaccines, we left the COVID-19 behind and took up the social dialogue process once again, and began by addressing some issues. First of all, we agreed to regulate what we call the rider law for regulation of people that work on digital and supply platforms, and a new right was introduced regarding the people that worked on algorithms and AI, or that were associated with companies that used algorithms and AI in the management of employment. And also working from home was regulated in a modern, innovative way to adapt to the changes in the market, the employment market, and gave further strength to collective bargaining and the position of all the parties involved. But the Vice President has mentioned this. We also addressed two very important topics for gender equality. On the one hand, the development of the equality plans at companies and measures to combat the wage gap. But out of that process of negotiation, the most important thing to come out of that process was the employment reform of 2021 and the social security and pensions reform. Briefly, if we go back to the employment reform of 2021, it had to do with three key areas: combating seasonality and precariousness in employment, reinforcing the role of trade unions, and also measures to prevent redundancies during times of crisis. A recovery of collective bargaining was a transcendental issue because it means reversing the process that led to the weakening of the rights of workers that had taken place in previous years, and was in that sense very, very significant. And the reform in 2021 helped all these things to develop much more positively. But the reform of 2021 also reinforced the role of industrial agreements and trade unions as a whole. Collective bargaining was very important, but seasonality was also very important. Spain was at the head of countries with a higher level of seasonal contracts, and these seasonal contracts and agreements, employment agreements, were something that had almost become standard in Spain through special short-term contracts. So the first thing that we did was do away with those short-term contracts and address the causes of the problem of seasonality. And the result was, I think, highly positive. In less than 2 years in Spain, we have reduced seasonality by 50%, and at this time we are getting closer to the European average that we were so far removed from. Regarding unemployment, we have looked at the measures that were introduced during the COVID-19 crisis and used them as an example by adapting them in order for these measures to be definite and permanent and help us face crises that might occur in companies and on the employment market in the future, to prevent redundancies and to regulate employment on the basis of guarantees and including training measures. All this has reduced unemployment in Spain, and in spite of the fact that I'll speak for another minute, I've just got 1 minute left, but we still have a very high rate of unemployment, 18.86% in Spain. But many other measures have been taken, and I can't go into them, but I do want to say that in addition to tripartite social dialogue, intense tripartite social dialogue that has developed in the course of this government's mandate, there have also been two very important agreements: the renewal of the sixth agreement for the autonomous solution of collective conflicts, and the fifth agreement for employment and collective bargaining, which is a key tool to further develop collective bargaining, adapt it and adjust it to the new needs of the economy, society and the employment market. And this fifth agreement is compulsory. It was signed between employers' representatives and trade unions, and is proving to be very positive and effective. The challenges, I think, have been described by the Vice President quite well, and we can really not add too much to that. We agree with a lot, or most of what she said, but we think that we should, as soon as possible, set up a permanent coalition government, because we have a lot of challenges to face. Some of them have been mentioned here, because social dialogue and its development go way beyond the mere sphere of the Ministry for Employment. We've got a digitalisation process here, ecological transformation process, and I think that social dialogue has shown that it is a very useful tool to face crises, modify conditions and improve working conditions, and it must be firmly committed to in the framework of development of policies in this country. Thank you very much.
Bueno, ¿se oye? ¿Sí? ¿Se oye? Sí. Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mary Cruz. But we really are doing very badly with time. I'm going to very quickly introduce the Deputy Secretary General for Trade Union Policy at the UGT, Fernando Luján. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. As I said with Yolanda, I'm going to very quickly read I'm going to introduce him. Fernando is a great professional in law and social security. He's been specialist lawyer in employment and social security for more than 30 years, and he has spent his whole life defending trade unions. And he was associate professor at the Autonomous University of Madrid, and he's an member of the Royal Academy of Jurisprudence of Spain. Since 2021, he is the Confederal Secretary, and since 22, he is the Deputy Secretary General for Trade Union Policy at the UGT, and he has been present at the employment reform of 2021 that has been mentioned so often today. Thank you very much, Fernando, for being here. Very briefly, you have the floor. Well, thank you very much. I do want to take a couple of seconds to thank you for giving me the opportunity to addressing the European Economic and Social Committee, and giving me the opportunity to give you the opinion of the trade union. Thank you to Carmen for the introduction. Thank you to the European Economic and Social Committee. Thank you to Oliver, who's no longer here. And thank you to my colleagues at Comisiones Obreras in Spain. My colleague at Comisiones Obreras has already mentioned and described social dialogue in Spain in the last few years, so I don't want to repeat what she said, because we're running very late and I don't want to exhaust you. But so I will focus on the value of social dialogue. What is the utility? What is the purpose of social dialogue from the point of view of our country, Spain, and from the point of view of Europe, which is what brings us together? First of all, the value of social dialogue, the legal architecture framework that we have from the point of view of Spain and the Spanish Constitution, and from the European point of view, it's the European Social Rights Pillar, the resolution of the 1st of June 2023, for instance, for the strengthening of social dialogue. Well, in spite of all this legal framework that reinforces the value of social dialogue in Europe and in our country, it's not the same depending on who is governing the country. and it is not the same. As Unai said, crises are addressed differently depending on the situation and the government. Here in Spain, we had a problem in 2011 and 2012 with the employment reform of that date. I'd like to underline the periods in time and the way things are done. The Popular Party, Conservative Party, won the general elections on the 20th of November 2011, and they set up their government on the 20th of December 2011. In a month, it had an absolute majority. They didn't need anything else. Now, 50 days later, on the 10th of February 2012, we were given a decree. They didn't speak to anybody, they didn't respect social dialogue, they didn't do any negotiation. They brought out a decree that put everything upside down in terms of employment legislation in our country. It's important to remember how certain crises are addressed by some people and by other people. This was done without dialogue, without negotiation, without even listening to the Employers Association, which now seems to be getting very alarmed because in the agreement the progressives are suggesting there is talk of reducing working hours, or there is talk of regulating redundancies to adjust the situation to the reviewed European Social Charter. So social dialogue was not working in Spain at the time. On the 25th of January 2012, an agreement was signed for employment and collective bargaining. It was the second agreement, the fifth agreement. It was the second of the 5 agreements that my colleague has mentioned. On the 7th of February, 3 days before the decree for the employment reform came in, there was another agreement signed for the extrajudicial solution of conflict. My colleague was saying that the most important thing that we've done has been to set up a dialogue with the participation of the employers, where the employment reform and the pension reform have been carried out on the basis of a tripartite agreement: trade unions, employers and government. The employment reform of 2021 and the pensions reform. But the Conservative Party employment reform of 2012 was quite different. And how did they reform the pensions? Well, exactly in the same way. In 2013, they reformed the public pension system in Spain was reformed following a previous reform by President Zapatero in 2011, where a tripartite agreement had been reached. But in 2012 and 2013, the employment reform was brought in and the pension reform were brought in without any social dialogue or consultation whatsoever. So it's very important to look at the legal framework and of things and the European perspective from the European Economic and Social Committee in order to appraise social dialogue, and we've still got a long way to go. We should arrive at agreements regarding what we believe an employment agreement actually is or should be, bearing in mind that algorithms and AI have now been introduced into the labour market, and the platform directive that is being planned should introduce minimum requirements in terms of employment agreements in Spain so that we can prevent what we call social dumping. And we must agree on where the workplace is actually going to be with the new technologies, new ways of working from home. Where is the workplace going to be? How are we going to define the workplace? We're sending work to Kenya where workers in terrible conditions are competing with us. So that is going to have to be considered, and what we consider the workplace is. And we must also control the over-exploitation not only of workers but of people, self-employed people, small companies that are being kicked out and left behind in the process of debate, and who are obliged to exploit themselves in order to make a living. And they should also be given some kind of response and some kind of answer. So it's not the same. How these things are addressed is not the same depending on who is governing the country and Europe. So that's all from me, basically. I'm just going to leave you the opportunity to talk. I want to once again thank you. and leave it there. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Also for being so brief. We're very thankful. And if anybody in the audience wishes to ask a question, we've got 2.5 minutes. So maybe we can have 2 very quick questions. Or we can leave it for tomorrow, yes. Yes, our president is telling me that we should leave it for tomorrow, which I think is a very good idea. So all we can do now is to thank you all once again. Maricruz, thank you for rushing through your presentation, and thank you all here for being here. And we have to tell you that this is not the end of it. You know that you've got a coach that will take you to the UGT premises for dinner, and I think there's a surprise ready for you. So thank you very much. Thank you to the interpreters for their good work, and thank you to everybody. Thank you. Wait a minute. Final note. Please, your receivers, your headsets, could you please leave them when you leave them on the table as you leave? That's very important. See you soon. Thank you very much.